evidence when it comes to rape myths, such as there's this belief that when women are raped, it's their fault. And this research has showed that this is the view of some officers. So it goes a long way in explaining why prosecutions are low, convictions are low, and why it is there are women being let down, and also men. Men can be sexually assaulted as well. And when that happens, when they go to policing, go to forces, they come against the same struggles as women who've also been sexually assaulted. So we're going to have a real conversation as to what is going on in policing right now. Joining me is Chris Tuck. She is a survivor and activist. And also Maggie Oliver, former detective constable with Greater Manchester Police and founder of the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Good evening to you both. Chris, this was a very difficult story for me to cover, and I'm sure many other journalists out there, if you go into the detail, I had to not read some of it if I was going to be quite frank, in terms of exactly what David Carrick admitted as well. Very extraordinary that he admitted that usually sex offenders, they will fight to the bitter end. Yeah. What did you make of this?
I just find it shocking in one instance, but not shocking in another, purely because society is made up of good people and perpetrators that use a situation or a vulnerable person to their benefit, i.e. they will take that person and assault them, as we've seen, or harass them or bullying them, as we've seen. And it is really important that this is not to be tolerated and not allowed to carry on. There has to be a culture within every institution of zero tolerance of this kind of behaviour towards vulnerable people, especially if they are meant to be role models within our society, that we are meant to look up to, that we are meant to be able to trust and go to if we have been a victim of a sexual assault. As a survivor myself, it was really important that I was able to go to a place that I felt safe, report to someone that I felt safe. And if we can't do that, something's going terribly wrong and has gone terribly wrong.
I mean, Maggie Oliver, this is, as Chris was pointing to, there's an issue within the culture, not just monsters like David Carrick, but the fact that he's able to remain. What is going on within the institution that you have, as I say, this monster, 49 sex offences, 24 counts of rape, that he was able to continue working as a police officer?
I think I can probably give an insight into what I believe is a broken culture from two perspectives. One is my experience as an ex-police officer. When I joined the police, I was actually 41 years old. I'd got 4 kids, so I was very unusual in that I'd already formed my opinions and I had a good sense of what was right and wrong. Yeah. And I was treated pretty badly by the institution when I joined. I felt I was being bullied, I was being judged, I was being treated as less than equal. That stayed with me throughout my time in the police, that feeling that it was the old boys network and they were out of touch. Obviously, I resigned to expose what I felt was the police in Greater Manchester Police not dealing with child sexual abuse effectively, ethically, properly. And, I've been saying for a long time, and it's just getting worse and worse, that the whole system is broken. I think all clean sweep, a royal commission into policing. I think we need a new set of eyes and outside scrutiny on corruption, on failures within the police. At the moment, my work I set up my own charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, exactly because what Chris has just said, it is far too often correct that a victim approaches the police and they are often belittled or dismissed or blamed and not listened to by an institution that is very, very powerful. So the foundation stands alongside many victims when they are trying to be heard. So we come into contact with victims every single day that are being treated badly. And I think the only solution for me is to bring in outside people. At the moment, all these decisions, this institution is being governed and led by chief constables who have themselves spent probably 35 years in an institution which is out of touch. And unless you're bringing in new sets of eyes and representatives from the communities within which they are serving, I don't believe we are going to change this, because the natural response of senior police officers is always to close ranks, to stick together, to defend the indefensible. And what we've got now is apologists, because they know the cat is out of the bag. But this happened with David Carrick, you know, almost immediately after the Sarah Everard murders. It's in the same force, and yet even he was allowed to continue. So we really, really need to completely change the system so that victims can trust the police. We need to invest in policing. We need to pay a decent wage, because we've undervalued police, and so we're attracting people who, you know, they don't go in for a lifetime career anymore. In the past, they would get a housing allowance. They would get, it was a career that you really were proud to be a part of. And I think that respect has gone. I think public trust has gone, and rightly so, because when you know that 1.3% of it's only 1.3% of reported rapes that ever end up with a charge. That's nothing to do with all the unreported rapes. That is a damning indictment of a system that is completely and utterly wrecked by those who are meant to be leading it. And in that, I include the Home Office and successive governments.
So, Maggie, what I thought was devastating about the Rochdale sexual abuse scandal, horrific men, Asian men, obviously not a representation of the whole community, but these are Asian men that targeted young women. Put aside those monsters a moment. The issue with that, the reason why you had to come out as a whistleblower is because these girls, these women were not listened to by the institution that they were going to, asking for help, and it's the institution that also let them down. Not just these, and that's what I'm wanting to talk about. Not just the monsters, these men that abuse those young girls and women. Not just David Carrick. It's what needs to be changed within the institution, and how. Where do you begin to do that? I know you said it just needs some new blood, some new voices, but what else needs to be done? Because you're not going to get enough new people to take over the police force that we do need. What else needs to be done to make changes to mindsets?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you've hit the nail on the head, because I resigned precisely. Really, it came down to the young girl called Amber, who was represented in the drama Three Girls that I worked on. You know, she was being judged as a victim, as not worthy, that she was, for God's sake, a madam. She was 15 years old. She was a child. And I was horrified by what I saw. And I went to the chief constable at the time, and because I believed it was a lazy officer. This is how naive I was, you know, who couldn't be bothered that they were building a job and a case around one girl, and all the other dozens of children were pushed aside to build an easy case. He didn't want to know. Well, it's taken 10 years of fighting alongside those girls for this year to get an apology for those children, and an admission that GMP were incompetent in their handling of that case. Well, that case got the spotlight on it because I resigned and because of the drama, and I spoke out. All the other victims who won't get that spotlight, they won't get a BBC drama focusing on their case, but every one of those cases is equally horrifying, and it destroys lives. And one of the articles you sent through today, Claudia, was you know, blowing the trumpet of Humberside Police and Hull. Well, let me tell you that we have been fighting alongside 7 victims in Hull who had been shut down, their cases closed. It was the most horrendous abuse. And so we supported them, and Sky News actually told their stories over 3 episodes. And now Humberside Police have opened their case. But that is because the Maggie Oliver Foundation fought tooth and nail alongside those girls who were being completely demonized by a force that is powerful. When a police officer in that position of power makes a judgment in the early days, a victim is powerless to do anything. And, you know, it's the police are marking their own homework. Professional standards boards who are doing the investigations are all made up of police officers themselves. So if your case happens to fall in front of somebody that you know that the that the intention or the way that is often dealt with, it is filed, it is pushed away. We need people to come in who know what they're doing, not internal investigations. We need proper independent scrutiny. And I think we really do need a clean sweep in police forces. This isn't just the Met, Claudia, because the foundation works throughout the country. I would say metropolitan areas are the worst, but most police forces are failing on many levels.
Chris, how do you change a mindset which seems so embedded in society, right? And this is the way boys and girls are brought up. Like, why is it that there's a view not to believe or trust a woman, to suggest that more women are more likely to report a fake sexual attack than a real? Because that's not the truth, that's not the reality. The reality is, indeed, there are women who come forward and it's false, but it's such a minority. The reality is that a woman is more likely to face some kind of sexual assault in whatever form that may be, and that is more likely to be true, and so it should be dealt with as such. Why is that we struggle with approaching sexual offences like that?
One, I think sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape is more prevalent than what we ever want to acknowledge and talk about.
It really is.
Because we're not having open conversations about all of this, it makes it very, very difficult for victim and survivors to come forwards. Many victim survivors don't come forwards until decades later, when their lives are falling apart, and that's been borne out by the Child Sexual Abuse Inquiries report. That's for women and men, boys and girls. They often don't speak about it because society doesn't allow the conversation to happen.
No, we don't.
And that is what we have to change first and foremost, is to raise awareness that abuse happens in all sectors of society, in all institutions. Predators, perpetrators can be anybody. Victims can be anybody. Let's talk about and acknowledge the actual scale and scope of abuse, and let's talk about the impact. Let's talk about the cost to society, billions and billions of pounds, and let's make it better and more open for victim survivors to be able to come forwards and tell their truth. And if they want to go through the criminal justice system, great, that's a way forward. But just to get the specialist support and help that they need in order to live their lives on a day-to-day basis is imperative. And, you know, as you said, it's only a tiny percentage where it might turn out to be a false allegation.
Because if women are sexually assaulted, guys, women, if you're listening, you know what I'm going to talk about. And guys, if you're listening, if a woman's sexually assaulted, the first thing they want to do is not say anything. Yeah. Instinctively, women want to be quiet. It's not a thing to... So let alone when it happens, you're not going to talk about it. The chances of a woman just dreaming up and saying, and a girl saying, I've been sexually assaulted and it's fake, it's not a thing. It's not. What is a thing, though? What is a thing? We've had people of power, men in power, run businesses, if you like, or if it's not even a business, so I'm talking about Jeffrey Epstein, if it's not a business, the likes of Harvey Weinstein, where they have complete power and control and they are abusing women and girls on a regular basis. That's the reality. Whereas you're not going to find a group of women and they're running a group where they work together to make claims, fake claims about sexual assault. That's not a thing. And also, guys out there, if you know any women, ask them if they've been sexually assaulted. Just ask. Anyone you're close enough to. I went to a talk with a whole bunch of women on sexual assault, and the person speaking said, put your hands up if you've been sexually assaulted. Let's say there was 10 women, 8 women put their hands up, including myself. It's a real thing. And you're not just talking rape, just any kind of form, being touched. Just ask any woman. You'll be so surprised how likely it is in my family.
How common it is.
How common it is.
Yeah.
It's so scary and so worrying. And you're right, Chris, we need to have an open conversation. Let women be brave enough to talk. But hey, we're going to continue this conversation after the break. You're watching Claudia Liza with Chris Tuck and Maggie Oliver on TalkTV. We are talking the changes that need to be made in policing, actually in the whole justice system when it comes to better protecting women and girls. This is off the back of David Carrick, who is found to be the most prolific sexual offender in the UK, or one of them, after he admitted 49 counts of sex offences, and which included 24 counts of rape. Extraordinary. And he was still working as a Metropolitan Police officer when some of these accusations came out. He's still waiting for sentencing, isn't it? We should be getting that in the coming days. But it's just so extraordinary that this man was allowed to still commit offences while being a serving Metropolitan Police officer. I've been speaking to Chris Tucker, survivor and activist. She's with me now. Maggie Oliver as well. She's a former detective constable with Greater Manchester Police and now founder of the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Maggie played a key role in coming out with some of the sex offences which are taking place against young women and girls in the Rochdale area. Just a very, very key role. Maggie, before the break, we were talking about some of the changes that needs to be made, but then also let's take a look at, just away from policing, which is something Chris Tuck brought to my attention in the break. It's not just about policing itself, it's about the justice system as a whole. When you're going to the courts, when you're dealing with the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not just the police that are involved in these cases. Often, always the charging decisions lie with the CPS, but you know, again, that is underfunded and under-resourced, and I think the whole system is broken. Yeah, I mean, what I would want to say though, Claudia, is that for anybody listening who is a victim, who is being pushed away by the authorities, or equally, if it's a survivor who maybe was abused 50 years ago and they want somebody to talk to who quite often is a survivor themselves, because most of our volunteers are survivors, they can self-refer to the Maggie Oliver Foundation, and we know the processes that should be followed. You know, every victim has a victim's right to review. You can go to the IOPC. You can challenge a decision if it's not gone the way you feel it should go, and that's a very difficult path to tread if you're all on your own. The CPS obviously are part of that decision-making process, but a victim's right to review takes that into account as well. But I don't think it's an easy solution, though, Claudia.
You're very right.
It's really complex.
What's your website, Maggie Oliver? How can people find your foundation?
Yeah, it's just www.themaggieoliverfoundation.com, and there's a contact form on there. And, you know, we are supporting victims and survivors throughout the whole country. We've supported, I think it's over 3,000 now in the past 3 years. So, you know, we're talking about things that I'm seeing every single day of my life. These are not historical failures. And it actually is, you know, for me, David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, they are actually very rare examples of a police officer who offends on that scale. What I'm more looking at is the overall picture. There's a lack of communication with victims. They are often the very last part of an investigation or of a case, and they should be at the centre of everything that is done. They should be kept in the loop. But you know, Chris will tell you that the reality is that doesn't happen. They're spoken to often at the beginning of the process, and it might be 3 years or 4 years, and then they're picked up often at the end, and in the middle there's a whole series of different officers become involved, and they don't have a point of contact.
That's so extraordinary. It's so sad, because ultimately, I made the point earlier, it was very extraordinary for David Carrick to admit his offences. Usually perpetrators, they fight to the bitter end, they deny it, they go through all the court process, put victims and survivors through hell. And I think one of the reasons why he did come out with the guilty, pleaded guilty, is because there were so many women who came together, who came out, worked together, and they were able to finally show that this man is a danger. But Chris, you know, we spoke in the break, and you did want to make that point that, as Maggie was saying, that this is a rarity. It's interesting because ahead of, I think, Wimbledon High School in Wimbledon, she's called on all those girls, the students, to be careful around lone police officers. But there is a strong argument that this is indeed a rarity. It's not common. And so we need to speak about the good police officers out there. But as Maggie was saying, as I was pointing to, it is the institution as a whole that maybe needs to change to make sure that people like Wayne Couzens, like David Carrick, cannot work comfortably.
No place for them.
No, indeed, there is no place for them.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm married to a police officer and he's done nearly 30 years service, and he is a shining example of a police officer, and I know many like him. I've been through the criminal justice system myself for 5 years, and I know where it's failed me and failed many others, but I also know that there are many officers within the police service that are doing a good job, and they are utterly appalled by these others that are literally blackening their reputation and their name. And there is no place for police officers like this, and they do need to be outed and they do need to be dealt with, because we need a police force that we can trust to turn to when we are victims of these horrible sexual assaults and rapes and molestations. We have to trust them.
Does your husband know where we need to start with making changes in policing? Is he aware? Does he speak to the powers that be? Are the powers that be calling on him for advice?
He doesn't work within sexual assault and violence, but just generally it's down to the leadership, it's down to the institution to treat the police officers with respect and to look after the police officers. So if they invest in the police officers that have the skill set and the training to deal with these cases, because a lot of them were taken away. The expertise in the actual sexual violence units, the Kate teams, the Sapphire teams, was actually taken away. And there you've got officers now dealing with cases that may not be necessarily the right people to deal with the cases, that they're not trauma informed, they don't understand how to deal with victim and survivors on the level that victim and survivors need, in order to make sure that their journey through the criminal justice system is the best that it can be when it's an awful situation to be in the first place. So it needs good leadership, it needs policies and processes and procedures that are robust, and it needs accountability. So it needs all of that. And if it's not working, we need to overhaul it, as Maggie says. We need fresh eyes on it. And, you know, the Victims Code of Practice, the Victims Commissioner of London, Claire Waxman, she's called upon a victims law, a victims hub. All of that is out there and it's all being worked upon, but we need action and we need implementation.
OK, Chris Tuck, survivor and activist, thank you so much for joining me on TalkTV, and also Maggie Oliver from the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Thank you so much as well, Maggie. And anybody listening, they might want to seek some advice if indeed you relate to some of the conversations we've been having. Maggie Oliver did give her details of a foundation. Do get in touch, or indeed, you know, go online just to seek any kind of help at all that you might need. But this is, you're going to have to forgive me for dedicating so much time to this. It's a serious subject. You know, I even have to admit, I'm in my 40s and I didn't really fully understand the issues affecting women and girls until I did reach my 40s, and I did, you know, experience some of this myself, and I'm so embarrassed by it. But the reason is because no one has these conversations. Nobody wants to hear about sex offences, and nobody wants to talk about it, and that needs to change, because once we start talking about it as a society, you guys out there talk to the ladies start better understanding what the issues are that we have to deal with. Be open, be honest. Then we can change society as a whole. And when society changes, it starts changing all those institutions. We can better protect people. And actually, when we better protect women and girls and some men when it comes to sex offences, when we understand the reality of it all, and then we actually properly charge people, properly get people behind bars who are behind this, the perpetrators, guess what? We're going to see a reduction in attacks against women and girls and some men. It's a difficult one, but when we start having those real conversations, then the changes will happen.